Let's get into the Tzitz Eliezer. The first thing that we mentioned was, at least from the material we've been given over here, is Rav Kook's opinion. Now, I put out a video about this, about a letter concerning Rav Kook's opinion regarding going to the Machon Mikdash. And Rav Kook wrote that in Mishpat Kohen and other places, he felt that, yes, the Machon Mikdash is still holy. He felt like the Rambam, okay, as opposed to the Ravad. But let's remember, what's the nafkamina? If you hold like the Rambam, what does it mean? Okay, everybody, we should say it. That's why I put this in blue. Whenever this issue comes up, Rambam says, go where you're allowed to go, stay away from where you're not allowed to go. Not blanket exclusion from all of Harabayas. That's a very important point. We don't want to conflate the two, which unfortunately, we see that this began to happen about 100 years ago, during the mandatory period. Okay, assuming like the Rambam led to this. And Rav Kook also wrote a letter, okay, clarifying his position. Aside from the Pashkeville, we already saw this letter, which is a well-known letter that is in possession. It's, public possession of everybody. It's signed by Rav Kook, explaining why he took that pragmatic approach, even though it wasn't halachic. And what was his reason for it back then? About 100 years ago, why did he write everybody stay off of Harabayas? We haven't yet founded a state and we're not in charge yet. The British, when did they take over Palestine?
What's the difference, though? Why is it...
What's not for me? First, let's get into history. Who was in charge of the land of Israel until basically the 20th century?
The Ottomans.
The Ottomans. What were the Ottomans?
Turkish.
They were Turkish. Okay.
Arabs.
What is their general? No, they're not Arabs. They're Turks. But they ruled over most of the Arab world, or the part of it that was significant. What general religion are these people?
Christians? Muslims?
Muslims. Okay. Muslims are Muslims traditionally friendly. What's been their view of Har-Bias or letting Jews onto Har-Bias? It was during the Ottoman regime that they imposed a complete blanket prohibition on the Jews going to Har-Bias. Why? Because, as attested to by many sources, both Jewish and non-Jewish, since the destruction of the temple, the Jews continued behaving as they always had according to halacha regarding Har-Bias, which is what? They would go there to pray.
You're saying why did they issue a ban if Jews were not going anyway?
No.
It must have been they were going, and then they had to ban them.
But they banned them also as a way to stick it to the Jews, make them good dhimmi. And that's, by the way, when the Waqf were always been in charge, the Muslim crust in charge, this is true. They're the ones who created the idea of the Kotel, in the Kotel area. What was? They kicked the Jews out of Har-Bias, and to make them feel worse, they only let them play. The closest they let them get to the temple was an alleyway on the southern end of the western wall, the western retaining wall of the Temple Mount. That was their way to really stick it to the Jews. And the Jews used to go to the Kotel, not today like you go, I'm going to go it's like a minion factory, and we go there for bar mitzvahs and stuff and the celebrations. This alleyway, which had maybe room for a minion, and they never even had a mechitza, by the way. That was a chiddush that they were finally able to have a mechitza in mandatory times, or Sefer Torah and things like that. That was like a real big deal. It used to be they go there to say kinnis and cry. And there was there's documents about this, writing. It was basically Friday afternoon. That was when the people go and just before it's time to get ready for Shabbos. That's when they had the big wailing wall aspect. So that was created by the Waqf to stick it to the Jews. Why? Because the idea of a Western wall where you're supposed to go and that's the holiest place, it's what left the Beis HaMikdash, that is something talking about the actual Western wall of the Heichal, which is not standing, by the way. It means the area of the Western wall is where the Shekhinah still is, and it never left. So that they transposed all those, Jewish folklore transposed all that to this part of the Western Wall, which the Waqf created, and we're sticking to the Jews. We have a question coming in. Ottomans. Yes, there are Ottomans. Good. So we're all on the same page there. So they're the ones who created that. And when the Ottomans were deposed, what happened to their empire? The British and French knew that the Ottomans, who entered World War I in already a precarious situation, like the sick man of Europe, okay, they controlled large parts of southeastern Europe and lots of the Middle East. And the British and French knew they're going to lose their share of the World War I, and all their territories are going to be taken over by the British and French colonialists, and they're going to chop it up and create different Arab oil states that they can keep in their sphere of influence, right? And there's also backroom deals. Basically, for the British Foreign Office, it's better for them to make deals with wealthy Arab potentates who are going to become, the biggest, most wealthiest people on earth because of their oil wealth, than to just make Jews who have no oil and no influence happy. So there's a whole Balfour Declaration, but then there was we'll take it back, give part of half, more than half the place to the Hashemites who we've messed over. People have been talking about the history. You know what we're talking about here, and people thought that with the new British regime in mandatory Palestine, things are going to change, right? Now maybe the Jews could go back to the Har Bayis. So Rav Kook and other Rabbanim first wanted to make sure that, one, we're not going to provoke anybody at this time because the Jews are not yet a majority. They're not in charge. They haven't even elected a Jewish mayor of Jerusalem yet. When was the first mayor of Jerusalem elected? In the mandatory period. Until that point, even though the British imposed democracy on institutions and cities in mandatory Palestine, it used to be, who's the mayor of Jerusalem?
Whoever took it over.
No, whoever the Ottomans wanted. Okay? A political appointment. There was no election. So they started having elections. And usually a guy from the Nashashibi family was elected. His prominent Jerusalem family that was not as viciously anti-Semitic as, let's say, the Al-Husseini family, who were Nazis. Okay? They produced the Mufti. Now, Nashashibis are a little bit more doable. They still live in Jerusalem. They're a little bit more cooperative. Okay? And you can see his name, Rajib al-Nashashibi, his name is still on the cornerstone of a few buildings. But then the Jews became the majority and started electing Jewish mayors, I think around the 1930s. Okay? So things were changing. Rav Kook wrote, now is not yet the time to press for this until we are in charge. Mashma, as many people have said, people deny this, but I don't know. Rav Kook's own words is basically, Rav Kook was waiting for the establishment of a state that would have control over Har Bayis, and then we could go ahead with this. So it's kind of funny to continue repeating what Rav Kook felt at the time. Things have become irrelevant, one, with the establishment of the state, and two, with the Six-Day War. And Rav Kook also, I would hope, would be like his ancestral. He was a Kohen. The Maccabees were also Kohanim. That when they start a war with you and you're fighting your survival and you have to chase them away, you don't go and say, well, how many Waqf people are on Har Bayis on a regular basis, daily? You don't even need them. There's just a few guys. Mostly are Jews walking around Har Bayis today because no one cares about it. They're just there because the state supports them. It's like, we must keep this institution here. Rav Kook would not go along with any of these things because the situation is entirely different. To say just like, here's what Rav Kook said.
Why did Rav Kook not want to provoke anybody?
Because the Jews were a minority.
What was he worried it was going to happen?
There were massacres, pogroms, right? The Jews are just barely there. How many Jews are in Palestine?
20,000.
And by the way, did the pogroms come? Yes, because basically, the history books talk about how when the British initially were law and order, so the Jews were able to flourish. Why? Because when things are okay, we keep everybody in check. If there's law and order, Jews can flourish. But once they decide to let the Arabs run amok, so that hurts the Jews. Remember in 1929, what happened? They showed weakness, and the Arabs started massacring Jews in Hebron. And basically that destroyed the Jewish community of Hebron, which had been there. That was one of the main four, why do they say the four holy cities? What are the four holy cities? That's not a halachic term. That's the four cities that used to share money from the Chalukah of the Shadarim, right? Chalukah of Shadarim is, there were four major places. By major, I mean 4 places where Jews could actually live and have a neighborhood. In Sfat, and in Tiberia, in Hebron, and Jerusalem, during old Yeshuv times. They're not large by any stretch of the imagination. But the Jews had synagogues and they had institutions. They didn't farm. How did they survive? They barely had parnassa. The answer? So they sent the shadarim. Shadar from the shader in Aramaic means to send someone out.
Right.
Shidur now means a broadcast.
Right.
So they had their shlichim who went all around the world collecting from their places. So they had shadarim who went back to Bavel who were Sephardim, like not Sephardim, Babylonians, and people went to Africa. People went back to Europe to go to the Pale and places like that and collect to support the Jews who lived in the 4 so-called holy cities. It's just it's folklore. It's not halachic terminology. And then how many Jews were actually populating the place before the idea of a major secular Zionist movement came about? You had waves, but the secular Zionists started showing up, and they're suddenly the ones who are negotiating with the British. You have Ben Gurion and his types, and now it's a threat. And the Jews are only beginning to become something in Palestine. Whereas, let's say, in the Transjordanian mandate, they already have an established king. They've given, that the Hashemites a kingdom. And they're saying, we're going to let you run the place. In Saudi Arabia, that's what it became, Saudi Arabia. They've given Ibn Saud his own kingdom. And he has his people there already. The Jews don't have leadership yet. The Jews don't have anything. They have to rebuild their land just to be anything. They barely have a few 100,000 people around. They called it the Medina Baderech in the 1930s when the Jews started getting their act together. They started finally talking about maybe making a state. So none of these things existed. Rav Kook passed away, what, 1935? I keep getting confused. Was it 32 or 35? He died at the age of 69. Okay, he didn't have that big Arichas Yomim. Rav Kook didn't get to see a lot of the things about which he was dreaming. So when Rav Kook wrote about this, here's what's in blue. Whose opinion is that? Rambam. Ulolam v'chein halacha rovachat ukvua b'Yisrael ayin sham. That's the halacha. It could be the Ravid disagrees and others have nuances, but we hold l'maaseh, if only l'chumra, but still l'chumra, that you're going to have what? You have to treat the Beis Mikdash like it's holy. The next paragraph says, that's why I put this in blue. Uvmokom acher hosif lichtov bazeh amarim berurim. He kept writing very clear writings. The big machlokas, Ravid and Rambam. Because we can't really say, are you going to say the Rambam's right or the Ravid's right? To say the Ravid's right, you have to go against the Rambam. So let's just go with the Rambam. Safik, L'chumra, Isser Karis. And Chiyuv Asham Tolui, Nami Ika, Lefachot Leman Domar de Lamed Beis Chatichos, like it says. So remember that other one, right? Cut this up into different pieces. The Yoter Mistaber Lomar, Shagam L'Ravid Ika Isser Torah. Even if you like the Ravid, the Makel opinion, like what? That the Kedusha is not permanent there, so there's no Kedusha, whatever it means, there still might be a prohibition just to walk around there. It doesn't mean like, oh, the Beis Hamikdash doesn't have those 10 levels of Kedusha anymore until the Beis Hamikdash will be reestablished. So, what am I going to tell you? You could go even walk into the Dome of the Rock. Right. The Ravid wouldn't take such a crazy thing, maybe out of respect, just like the din of no sitting the Azara. That's not a Kedusha. It's not a din of Kedusha, that's a din of respect of the place, which is slightly different. But the Rav would say, just like you can't go and say, well, I'm going to sit in the Azara because the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. He wouldn't be matter that. He wouldn't allow blanket entering the place. Ulinyan kavod ha'uma la'niyatati yoter haya kavod haklal nikar im nishtadel she what yimseru b'yadenu b'derech kinyan hachatzirot asbuchot la'kota kadosh. Remember this idea to build a Beis Hamikdash, to build a shul. This I marked in green. Why? Because this isn't something he's telling you as halachic source. He's expressing something of his own mind, I would think maybe even his own creation, which, by the way, is maybe fallacious. Right? The Tzitz Eliezer is saying, in my opinion, the greatest respect, the best gedula we could have is not that the Jewish people stand up and, you know what, build the Beis Hamikdash Yehuda Maccabee style. It's, let's build a big shul and wait for Mashiach. So that's what he basically writes. That's what his whole paragraph says. Okay? And he writes it in poetic terms. Okay, Malach Habris, Elionavi is going to come. It's all going to be good. But like we said, that's folklore. That's not halacha. Yeah. By the way, there are Rabbanim who's explicitly disagreed with this. The Rabbanim who were pushing to build the Beis Hamikdash. Foremost among them, Rav Goren. It wasn't like just sit down and wait for Mashiach. That didn't get us out of the gullus. So too, now it's time to go. And in the paragraph begins with Nunbet, he says, you have this on your phone, by the way. Just don't have my color coding. Shagam l'das haravid yeshiser Torah, mivaru gano achrim b'sifrayim, v'zohi asiba sheravad lo yisigal Rambam b'ferek yotet milchus maser korbanos. The Ravid would hold like the Rambam's bottom line. You can't go to certain places. Like you said, the premise of the Rambam, the Ravid disagrees. The whole Kedusha aspect, that's the premise.
Still agree that you can't go.
Yeah, you agree with, and that's why
you would just say it's not because of Kedusha, it's because of
or some other reason.
Right.
And then that explains why whenever the Rambam invokes Kedusha of Beis Hamikdash is still there and then gives the consequence thereof, the Ravid doesn't have to go and say, oh, I disagree with you, Rambam. Why? Because he disagreed with the premise earlier, but he doesn't have to disagree with the results each time because he might even agree with the results. That's what he's talking about over here, that Rambam we saw at the end of Hilchos Beis Bechira and Ma'aser Korbanos, where the Rambam talks about, you can bring Korbanos today. And the Isser of Shchitat Chutz still applies today. That's the Isser of bringing a korban wherever you want. Hold on a second. I just took this off the screen. I'm going back to Riverside for 1 second, just to make sure we're still connected. Okay. I want to X out of the chat. If we get disconnected, by the way, gentlemen who are with me on the Riverside, if for whatever reason we're slightly disconnected, I will not know about it. So please contact me personally. Okay, send me a personal message in order to get me back with you. Okay. Back to the Tzitz Eliezer. So he's just basically explaining why it is the Ravid didn't, go against the Rambam all these times. And now he put this part in blue. Once again, when he's in blue, what does that mean? The part where he's basically giving over the Rambam's general opinion, which is conflated with a more machmir modern opinion. He's quoting the Rambam. This is the Iker halacha, by the way, the one that he doesn't emphasize, but you say, what is it? We saw this before. You still have to revere the temple. What does it mean? Lo yikanes ala makom shemuter li yikanes sham, v'lo yeshiv bazar, v'lo yakel rosho keneged shar hamizrach. Show the respect. Don't be lightheaded, right? You have to treat the Beis Hamikdash as it always was, but you're allowed to go where you're allowed to go. That's the part that they don't want to say out loud, because you just said, "Oh, there is where I can go." Like Moshe Feinstein pointed out as tshuva. Of course, there's a place you can go. Okay, and it's eternal, just like Shabbos. V'ravad lo tziyin b'chan klal lasigal masha asur, right? Mipnei she'ikar yisur sheshno gam l'zman hazeh modeh gam haravad. He still would agree with the essential point. You're still not allowed to go there. Okay, maybe it's a hekish. He says here. Fine. Go to the next paragraph. There's a story over here. V'yuan od b'sefer Shar Yerushalayim, Shar Hey, gate number 5. That's a book. Jews love gates. Gates are always metaphors. Okay. Misupar Masha Sar Moshe Montefiore, Moses Montefiore, who was a centenarian. He was a British big shot. He also sponsored a lot of things. Okay, early proto-Zionist. Asa neged Ratzon Kol Yudim Asher B'Yishlayim Sheitrubo Shasur Likanes L'Sham. He went into Harabayas. They told him it's all usher. By the way, this is already a time when the Jews had gotten used to what? The Ottoman imposition, just plain don't go. So he went. V'chein b'vayilaket Yosef. Mechoveret Yud Gimel Siman Kuf Lamidalad Shewad Sham Sherabash Yerushalayim Hagon Rav Shmuel Salant. Rabbi Shmuel Salant, who also, I think, lived to the ripe old age of 96. He was so old that they had appointed the Adaris, or someone close to Rav Kook, I forget the name, I think it was Rabbi, I think it was the Adaris, to become his successor. They invited him from Europe. When Rav Salant's time comes, you're going to be his assistant, and you're going to succeed him to the rabbinate. Except, he didn't live long after making Aliyah. He died, it was like maybe 70, and Rav Shmuel Salant continued going for like another decade or so. Okay, so he outlived his successor. Okay, so Hochiach Oto Al Panav Alkach.
What year is this?
This is the early 1900s. Okay, this is before, I think it's during the Ottoman period. Okay,
How
Moses
was Montefiore
Montefiore
able to get onto the Harabayas?
because he came as a diplomat.
Okay.
He came as a big shot. I want to go see. People used to go on Harabayas barely, but you could go. He didn't look like one of these old Yishuv Jews.
Right.
He looks like a British Tsar.
Right.
He's a big shot. Okay, so Rav Salant mustered him. No. He said everybody disagrees with the Ravid. Apparently, Rav Salant didn't just go around like we do now, only in the mutter areas. He mamish walked around on Har Bayis, right in the middle of the Azara, and maybe even went into the Dome of the Rock. Okay? Remember, they didn't have nowadays a so-called status quo. Very important. The idea that you just walk around the perimeter of Har Bayis like you do now, as Orthodox Jews do, that's an invention. That wasn't done in the old days. When you went to Har Bayis, you just walked around. And by the way, it happened at the 6 Day War, which is a big problem, by the way. So it doesn't mean that Rav Salat, that Moses Montefiore kept to the Maimonidean halacha as Maseches Kelim. The point was that he mamish walked freely on Har Bayis and into real holy places where he should not have. So Rav Salat yelled at him and said, "The halacha, we don't hold like the Rav, we hold like the Rambam." Okay, V'avlo Ravid Yeshiser Torah Ayin Sham V'chachi Gam Halach Dato Shel Gon Harav Tzvi Pesach Frank. Okay, so all this has shown us is that the Jews held of the Rambam's opinion, and that when people
he's bringing us to show that the fact that he rebuked him means you shouldn't go to Harabayas at all. But you're saying he really rebuked him because he went.
I don't know that he is.
Go.
Even the Tzitz Eliezer is just trying to tell you right now that the halacha is like the halacha, at least in practice, is like the Rambam. And when people don't do like the Rambam says, meaning they go freely on Harabayas, that's a problem. But we have not yet to see any argument. Don't go to Harabayas, period. Remember, you just said...
It sounds to me like he was saying to Moses Montefiore that you shouldn't go to Harabayas, shouldn't have gone up there at all.
Yeah, he shouldn't have gone there because what would happen? What happened? He went, mamish, up to Harabayas. He didn't limit himself to the area around the perimeter where it's mutter, because he just said, like the Rambam, lo yikanes elo makom shemutter likanes l'sham. Say that, keep saying. That's the Rambam thing. Lo yikanes elo makom shemutter likanes l'sham. Only go to the places where you're allowed to go. That's the problem if you hold to the Rambam. People don't do the Rambam. Once they go in, they just go freely. And it continues, and the next paragraph is, by the way, where this isn't the exact Tzitz Eliezer, parts are skipped around. These are the highlighted parts that are supposed to prove what? You're not supposed to go to Har-Bayis period today. So if you want, you have the whole, my camera's on, do people see me? I don't know, but here's the Tzitz Eliezer, Chelik Yud, just a historical point. This volume was published in 1985, Tufshin Mempeh. Most of the tshuvas here are dated to Tufshin Kuf Zion to Tufshin Kuf Tet, which would be 67 to 69. But, okay, the camera's off, fine, so people can't see it. But the Tzitz Eliezer says in his introduction to this volume, volume 10 of the Tzitz Eliezer, the person, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, wrote that this wasn't two tshuvas at the beginning, first appeared in the Kerem Tzion publication back in, I think, around 1970 or so, or sometime in the 1970s. You can look it up the exact date. I think I found one from like around then. So the tshuva itself was published in 1985, but these are things that Rav Waldenberg wrote in the height of the frenzy and the ecstasy of the aftermath of the 6 Day War, where everything was perfect. Everybody thought, Mashiach's coming. Rabbi Wein says that was the greatest. But the problem was, what happened after the 6 Day War is they opened up Har-Bayis for a while, and what was happening?
Everyone was wandering around everywhere.
Everybody just going free. That is a major halachic problem. The problem is even Orthodox Jews didn't know the intricacies. Basically, study this chapter in Kalim and the halachas, and the halacha is very clear. You can't just go wherever you want to go. The functioning Beis HaMikdash means that the Levium are around there, making sure that people don't go where they ain't supposed to go. Jews can go to the Beis HaMikdash just fine, but you have to make sure you've purified yourself to the level that allows you. A woman who gave birth has to bring her korban, right? Right? She has to wait in the Ezras Nashim before they bring her korban. And before that, she had to do the whole 80 days and go to the purification. Anybody who was a Tamei Mace, what did he have to do? He had to present himself to the Kohanim somewhere at one of the places where they do the sprinkling, which could have been on Har-Bayis, by the way, or outside Har-Bayis, outside Jerusalem, and get sprinkled on day 3 and 7 with his clothing on, right? Clothes also get contaminated, right? Kalim. So it'd be a whole family presents themselves in front of the Kohen to get sprinkled on day 3 and day 7. So these are all intricate halachas, which even if you have someone who knows the halachas, he has absolutely no practice, experience keeping them. So the Rabbanut decided then, rightfully, that we have to stop everybody and then get an order. But they didn't do the next stage. It's like, I give the mushal because we're talking about God's love for the Jewish people. They're like a couple, right? So these couple, they're going to be married soon. They have a week, but they can't keep their hands off each other. So what do? You tell them, sorry, not yet. We actually believe in morality.
Right.
But we not just tell them, you know what? You go there, she go there, indefinitely. You're never getting married.
Right.
People stand for such a thing? No, we're going to teach them the laws. We'll say we'll arrange a nice chuppah for you. Yom Chatuna Tov, Yom Simchat Libo. That's right in the chapter before that. Then Solomon could have his wedding feast. Okay, so you have to give them, but they didn't do the next stage. They just told them no. That's it. So that's a problem. He continues in Sefer Lishat HaShamin, Katuv B'Shem HaRimat. Who's the Rimat? Rav Yechiel Michal Tukachinsky. Who was he? The posek of the first half of the 20th century, a friend of Rav Kook's. He was the one who created our luchos. He wrote the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch for those who live in Eretz Yisrael because the Misrad Dato came to him. He was already a senior rabbi. He said, Kitzer Shulchan Aruch, it's good, but it doesn't tell you how to take Truma and Meiser and keep Shemitah. It's not updated. So update this Kitzer for us. And he has many Svarim, many wonderful Svarim. So he was in the same club with Rasvi Pesach Frank and others, Litvaks, who had been brought to Eretz Yisrael around that time. Okay, like the Chazon Ish also had a connection to Rav Kook. Okay, Rav Kook was part of the leader of a group of Talmidei Chachamim like these. Okay, remember the Chazon Ish, he was younger than Rav Kook, I think. Right, he's the one who stood for Rav Kook the entire time. So he was one of them. And there's a big shul right in the middle of Jerusalem that's named after him, and also Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, there's a shul named after him, and right in Mea Shearim. So he wrote one of these farm. He wrote, "Kisha Shama Hagon Rav Shmuel Salan Zatzal et Maaseh Hazeh Shelo Luchiach Shalach Luchiach Tzar Hatzadik Montefiore Al Asutov Mishgeh Gedolah." Montefiore story. Rav Salant sent to his eminence what uvivo oelav hitzadik bidmod shelo yada sheyesh alzeh iser Torah. He came and said, "I didn't know I was violating the iser Torah. I went into where I shouldn't have gone on Harabais." Hu chashav she'iser rak mitzad Yishmaelim. He thought it's usher because something with the Arabs. If the Arabs were there, but I can go if I'm not with Arabs. Mekivan shekibil reshut, or maybe they wouldn't let him.
No, the Arabs just
don't let.
It's usher. It's
yeah.
usher because of the Arabs said.
Mekivan shekibil reshus. Well, that's the next word. It says samach. Yeah, samach l'kaim gam mitzvazo. He knows a mitzvah. Once I get permission from the Arabs, let's go. He wasn't a Talmud Chacham. Ella shekain omnam agon Rav Shlomo Salant kemo agon Rav. This is Michal Arabach. I'm not sure what the first name is. Okay. Garu ba'ele shamru l'nadoto b'amram shasazot hasar tzadik bishkagal vitmimut ad kan lashon. Okay, fine. More of the Montefiore thing. But once again, this doesn't tell us that Montefiore violated going to Harabayas per se. It means that Montefiore
didn't do it properly.
Yes. Parashnu kasimla. That's an expression from Deuteronomy. It talks about they have Tanas Basulim. So the father puts out the sheep. By the way, it's a Machlokas Tanaim and Poskim. Machlokas Tanaim and Machlokas Rishonim. Does it literally mean show them the sheet with the blood on it, or is it prove the point? Right? Who's the one who says it's literal? Think of the Ramban, based on the Tanaim. And Rashi and Rambam say it's a figurative expression, always was a figurative expression. But the problem is, there are Tanaim who say it's not a figurative expression, it's literal. There are Tanaim who say it's figurative. Okay? So, by the way, here it is certainly a figurative expression.
Yes.
Okay? So, what are you doing? Say it again. Everybody has affirmed the Isser of Achronim Rishonim to go to Makom HaMikdash. Now, when I say Makom HaMikdash, that's ambiguous. Why?
Because it could mean exactly where the Mikdash stood, or it could mean the whole Harabais.
Exactly. So we all agree that there's an Isser Makom Mikdash, but then, like I say, you can't go to the Azara, what Rambam calls Mikdash, Machaneh Shechina. And you're also, some people aren't supposed to be in Machaneh Leviyah, right? By the way, there's a few Mishnayos where the Rambam himself takes a position, not let's say Rashi, every Mishnah to itself. He says Mikdash means what? All of Jerusalem, for the din of shofar sounding and some other things. Mikdash is Jerusalem. Rashi disagrees in a few cases, and other Rishonim disagree. And then Rambam says in Sefer Avoda, which you have in front of here, like Rav Brand started proving, and I have a list of all the cases where the Rambam says Mikdash means not Jerusalem, but more specifically, Har Habayis. Nafkamina, you could bow down on the stones on Har Habayis. Because normally you're not allowed to bow down on stone floor, cut stone floor. But because all of Har Habayis is Mikdash, in regards to that and other dinim, so too you could bow down. And sometimes Mikdash means very specifically what?
The base of Mikdash itself.
Which is just the Azara. What existed in the desert, which is an edifice, an altar, and the surrounding courtyard. That's the minimum Mikdash. And like we saw, they added to the Mikdash. There's another Azara, and there's a Chel, and now there's a Har Habayis. It still has din of Mikdash. So when we say Mikdash, we have to be very unambiguous. So even if, let's say, the Rishonim and Achronim affirm the Isser to go to Makom HaMikdash, we're being Tofis Merubah, as we say, if we say it means all of Har Habayis, and that's it. Because that's against what the Rishonim and the Mishnah say. Okay? So he continues, Da'at l'nachon nakel. Yeah, the navon. Nakel she'ein bizman hazeh bechlet shu mi shehu v'luye kegova arazim govho. Oh, gova arazim govho. Who can actually say? Who's going to do? I call this the Rav Elyashiv fallacy. Who's actually going to express an opinion now? This is such a thing. No one should be expressing opinions. To do what? Lachlok al abirei poskim shedavar ba'aloch diber ba'alocha lo davar ba'alocha lo nela mineged einehem abiroth v'chayadua lavo l'shanot halacha kavua mikubelet tzarich t'nai rishon she'mishnim yu gedolim mikodmehem mishanim. Sorry, they have to be bigger. Basically, what is the Tzitz Eliezer saying here? If we want to go against the Pesach, we have to be great individuals. And 100%, no one has gone against the Rambam. Everybody's doing exactly like the Rambam says. Lo yikanis ela makom shemuter likanis l'sham. Not, it is strictly forbidden to enter all of Harabayas. We have yet to see that, by the way, of any source. If all this was given, maybe it exists. We have never seen a source yet that is Rishonim saying the Isser to enter Mekomos HaKadoshim now extends to all of Machane Leviyah or all of Harabayas. Doesn't exist yet. And I wrote this. Okay, so in English I wrote now, until now he is reaffirming entering the forbidden areas. We have not seen any Chiddush yet saying all of Harabayas. But that's what it became. So we have to find, when does it become, you know what, don't go to any part of Harabayas, period. We haven't seen that source yet. Are you aware of which source it is? Yeah, you do? Maybe you could tell me, because I'd be happy to see it. It's a Gemara. Yeah. Well, it says that. There's a Gemara says, mitzvah lo lisgaros bagayim. So if the Goyim get upset, don't do it. So if me selling the land of Israel upsets the Goyim, don't sell the land of Israel. And if wearing that Jew hat of yours, that big beanie, take it off. And if growing your hair over here long upsets them, so don't do that. That upsets them too. Basically, if they get upset at you're keeping a mitzvah, don't do it. Because it's a mitzvah. Okay, it's a mitzvah. But if they tell you not to do mitzvahs, if anything else that's not a mitzvah, if they don't want you to do it, don't do it. Because it's a mitzvah not to provoke Goyim. Right? Which of the 613 is that? Which parsha is that in? It's not the Raisa. It's the Rabbanan. Good. It's a very funny thing. The Rambam left out that mitzvah, but the Megillas Esther and the Ramban, who have the sagas, mitzvahs that the Rambam left out, or halachas he left out, they didn't point this one out either. The Rambam talks about the Rabbanan, so he has a whole Hilchos Eruvin, which he says this is entirely the Rabbanan. Right? What does he say at the beginning of Eruvin? Has the Rambam introduced Hilchos Eruvin? It's a great. Normally the Rambam says in the halachas, right? Says how many mitzvahs asay and lo saseh are involved here, right? So for Shabbos, he says, let's introduce Hilchos Shabbos. Yesh b'chalan chamesh mitzvot, 5 mitzvahs, okay? Lishboth bashvi, shelo lasop of melacha, shelo la'anosh b'Shabbos, shelo atzeit chutz l'gvul Shabbos l'kadesh hayom b'zchira, right? And then we get to, don't do melacha, fine. And the next stage is Eruvin, right? How does he begin Hilchos Eruvin? Mitzvah se'achat, v'hi midivrei sofrin, ve'ena min ha'minyan. One mitzvah, it's the Rabbanan, so it's not in the list of the 613. It's to make Eruvin. If you can call that a mitzvah. Some would say there's no mitzvah to make an Eruv, because you have no mitzvah to do it. If you're staying at home in your own courtyard, well, you own the entire building and the entire courtyard, and it's just you and your immediate family, and you don't have a rishus with anybody else, and you don't intend to move your tchum, right, on Shabbos, so there's no, who says you have to make an Eruv? It's not a mitzvah, Sometimes you could just, everybody's sharing food anyways. If the entire city eats one communal meal together all the time, right, they're already sharing their food, and they're communists, basically. If we were all communists in Jerusalem, so we'd have no reason for an Eruv. Yeah. Like Kibbutz Lavi they have the hotel, and then they have the dining room. Like the regulars, sometimes not everybody has to do this, but they're all eating with their kids together. Yeah. Okay, so let's continue. Nun Daled. This is section Nun Daled. Yeshnam shogim o mat'im. There are some who are shogeg, or some who make the mistake, right? To'im. They make other people make the mistake. Harotzim lihitalo to be garto ha'yidua shel Rambam. Some people want to say, that big letter of the Rambam. What did the Rambam say in the letter? So written in Sefer Charedim. Well, we have it's in this book. The Rambam writes, I went to the Beis HaMikdash and I davened there. Shame that I daven there when it's in the Churban. I should be zocha to daven there when it's rebuilt. And his son wrote likewise, right? What does he say here? Okay? So it means that the Rambam went to Makom Mikdash. So what is he going to say here? Valrak ish shogel feti yalel dato lavin ola minkach. Ki Rabbeinu Gadol zal loya ose et devarav plaster l'chvi shevenu sheposak lanu mifurash et pisko bezel le'iser gamas manazeh. Would the Rambam go against his own psak to go into Makom Mikdash nowadays? Right? The Rambam says you can't go to, what the Rambam say? The Rambam says, you can't go into Makom Mikdash. When the Rambam said lo Makom Mikdash means a place you can't go. But there are places you can. So I put this in blue. Uvarurefo shenichnas rak ad makom shehur shali kanes al pi hadim. When the Rambam went to the makom ba'is l'gadol v'kadosh, he only went to the place that's mutter al pi hadim. So I think if I could talk to Rav Waldenberg and tell him, yes, when Rambam says ba'is l'gadol v'kadosh, he didn't mean the heichal. People think bias means the Heichal. No, Rambam said in Ilchos Beis Bechira, bias Agadol Kadosh, the Mikdash, includes all Har Abayis, like Rav Brand showed in 10 different places. So Rambam says, I went into the base of Mikdash, he means Har Abayis, but only to the places I'm allowed to go. Okay? The Rambam only went to where he's allowed to go. Ufirei tamakomot tamutorim kafi amatzav ishi beferk zayin hilchos beis bechira uferk gimel mehilchos beis mikdash, which I showed you before. The Rambam only went to the places where Rambam said you could go, up to the Chil. Okay, Har Abayis up to the Chil. That must be where the Rambam went.
Okay.
Tzitz is right there. The Rambam only went.
Right.
So what's wrong with relying on the Rambam?
Well, it's what it says.
The Rambam knew what he was doing. Now we put this in green. Anu lo neda adma. I don't know where that is. That's Muntz's fallacy. The Rambam could do it, but I can't. I don't know. I've never been there. The answer is the Rambam also tells you that you don't get anywhere close to the Machon Shilo unless you go up, like I showed you in that schematic, which is also in his notes to Maseches Midos. And you know what? You know what else is kind of funny? It's still there. Those malos described the Rambam. Each of them is an amma by an amma, and you go up and you can count the stairs and a certain amount of steps between the Ezras Yisrael and Ezras Nashim, or from Ezras Nashim to the Azara. Those are still there.
Same amount of steps.
Yeah, isn't that funny? It's still there. As a matter of fact, they have it.
Maybe it's different. Maybe it's all been raised and rebuilt.
No, it's still there. They haven't touched it. He's going to bring that up also. He says, I think it's been raised and rebuilt. But they tell us now the floor of Har Abayis, the current one, was put down in Bar Kokhba times by the Jews who were trying to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. They haven't had really major renovations on Har Abayis. Even the Dome of the Rock, the beginning of the structure was built by Jews who, with the Muslim conquest, thought that they'd get a chance to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. Okay? What happened to Bar Kokhba's Mikdash? He started rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash. You know what happened to the building ultimately?
Turns into the Rock?
No, it turned into a temple of Zeus. The Romans reconquered it before they could have a big Chanukah Sabayas. It's terrible, but that's what happens. So I wrote in English, some say Maimonides actually went to Makom Mikdash, but he actually just went to those places in Har Abayis where it's clear that it's permissible to enter. Okay? So the Tzitz Eliezer is basically saying that I don't know where it is, where in Har Abayis you can go. The Rambam knew, but do we know?
This whole thing that he said basically he agrees with the Rambam that you can go to certain places and all this stuff. He's just saying we just don't know where that is.
Well, he says he don't know.
Anu
not Neda. I don't know where that is. So figure it out. You're not allowed to say I don't know. If you're a posek, especially a Sanhedrin, you're not allowed to say, it's a good question. No, your job is to decide these things. But there are people who've put their minds to this, and also nowadays, used to be you're looking at a map of Har Abayis, it's just 2D bird's eye view. Now you actually have physical evidence. You go there, you could actually see what the Rambam describes, what the Chazal describe, what the Radbaz says. The Dome of the Rock is where the Kodesh HaKadoshim was, and Amma is about 18 or 19 inches, give or take. We can measure these things, and Chazal told us exactly where it is, and it fits the topology that you see on Har Abayis today. The Muslims didn't do a lot on Har Abayis, you should know. They didn't really care about the place. You know why? It wasn't holy to them. You see pictures of Har Abayis from the late 1800s and early 1900s. What does it look like? All the niceness, especially those trees, Har Abayis was turned into a nice place by the Jordanians because they had lost. The Hashemites lost Mecca and Medina. They used to be in charge of the actual Muslim holy places in Arabia. The Saudis took over. They're now in charge. The Hashemites have nothing. They have Amman, which was a nothing. So they took over Har Abayis and they turned that into, it's like a trademark. Third holiest place in Islam. Come and see Har Abayis. And we created a new holy place. They're the ones who put the gold dome on top of the Dome of the Rock, which was just tin. Like the Al-Aqsa Mosque just has that, cheap metal on top. It was a nothing. It was just a nice building surrounded by weeds. There's no reason why Arabs would want to go there to pray, because you know why? Traditionally speaking, historically speaking, they have no connection to the place. It was just a big shtoch to the Jews. The northern half of Har Abayis is now full of olive trees. It's treated like a park. That's where they go to. It's used as a kapandaria, a pass-through for women taking their children to school, even though it doesn't help them. And kids use the big open platform where the Azara is supposed to be, and they play soccer there. It's a holy place. That's why they go there to play soccer, right? Real holy place. Like I said, it adds insult to injury. It's just, they created it. They were the ones who niced it up. They polished the Dome of the Rock building, and they put it on a golden dome to suddenly make it a holy place. And it was only a few years before the Six-Day War they actually put the gold on top, as though it's saying, "Here, take this, conquer the place, and use this to remake the Kalim." It's a gift, but you don't take the gift. So here's a part of the Tzitz Eliezer, which is, by the way, the most disagreeable part. There are many Rabbanim. Rav Goren would yell at him for writing such a thing like this. It has been contradicted by many sources, halachic and otherwise. What does the Tzitz Eliezer write? It's also told that in this farm, you're back. Did you leave before?
Yeah, the bus is not coming in a while.
Okay, so we're going to have food here and we're going to go have food elsewhere. So you can stick around. Okay? It says in the books, Kashera Muslimin bo achar mikain livnot binyanehem b'Har Habayis. After that, when the Muslims showed up to build their building on Har Habayis, what did they do? Hechrivu ve'aru ad hayisodet yisodos hamakomos hakadoshim. They destroyed everything. They dug everything up. They just total redoing of whole of Har Habayis. Is that true?
Not
No,
according to what you
evidence.
said.
No, the evidence is against that. Okay.
So he's just wrong.
Vishchisu volu is pnei karka. They destroyed and swallowed up the face of the surface of the karka. Har Habayis, the topology of Har Habayis is nothing like it used to be. The problem is they did a good job of leaving the stairs and the malos exactly as described in Maseches Midos. They did a very lazy job in destroying.
The wall of Ezra Nehemiah is still there, so they didn't dig that up, which means that the ground around it is also still there.
Yeah, it's all still there.
So where's he getting this from?
I don't know. He says this farm. There's another tshuva. Compare this to the tshuvas like that the loonies like to say. Tzitz Eliezer write a tshuva about how you could do a sort of sex change operation on someone and it would make them the opposite sex. So that's what they lie. Even the Tzitz Eliezer believes in transgenderism and sex changes. The Tzitz Eliezer, he's the only person who ever said such a thing. But the Tzitz Eliezer introduces the tshuva with saying there was a case in the 1960s before they understood genetics of a child born with what appeared to be female genitalia and like microscopic male genitalia. So the doctor says, we're just going to cut off the male genitalia before he grows into an androgynous, and he'll grow into a properly fine girl, he'll be fine. So Tzitz Eliezer says, on the assumption of what they're telling me is true, is this the proposed procedure an act of serus, which is forbidden by halacha. So he ruled that it's not because it's technically a girl, it'll grow up fine. But the problem is then they discovered genetics. 1960s, they didn't understand genes so much, what the XY means and how. It turns out this guy was XY. And most of the time with all the different genetic abnormalities you have in the sex chromosomes, the default is external female genitalia. You only get proper male genitalia if everything's going right. Okay? So this was just a malformed male. And they actually did take it off. But the Tzitz Eliezer says, basically on the assumption that everything the doctors are telling me is true, here's the theoretical halacha. But who says what they're telling you? That you trust too much of these doctors. A lot of times, especially in these outlandish parshas now, there was a doctor who believed with the twins. Like they talk about the first doctor who did this whole transgender thing was this loony who had twin boys who were had a problem with their circumcisions. They did it surgically in the hospital. They destroyed their penises. So they said, we'll turn them into girls. When we raise them as girls, they won't know any difference. And they both grew up really to be messed up, and they found out what happened to them. They committed suicide. Okay, those were the first kids that happened to.
That was the first case?
That was the first cases.
Wow.
Go look this up.
Like,
this
was great. Let's do this again.
Yeah, and they keep doing it. They keep imposing this on people. So the Tzitz Eliezer is relying on other sources. This is not a halakha statement. They tell me this and that. Unfortunately,
they messed up the circumcision on both of them,
or one of them, and they did it to both of them. You can read this. I forget the names, but it's a well-known fact history. They can't even take this out of Wikipedia because it's so well known. These cases. Either way, the Tzitz Eliezer is doing here. He's not saying I'm giving my halachic opinion. He's telling you, here's the history as we know it. Brought down in Sfarm. Unfortunately, the evidence indicates, like you're saying now, not too much evidence indicates that the floor of Har Habayis is from the time, like I said, time of Bar Kokhba. The Muslims have not changed the topology of Har Habayis one bit. And the Dome of the Rock is still there. The rock is still there, and it's still the same height, and there's the weight to the floor. It's really quite measured that the floor outside of the Dome of the Rock matches what it should be. And the steps, if you'd head from the Dome of the Rock eastbound to where the Jews daven now, you can count the steps and the paces. It perfectly fits the map that Rav Zalman Koren, and the others who know this have been saying all along. Everything is just as the Rambam said. The Rambam himself was there. And not the Ram. I have a line here. I brought what the Ramban says about these types of things. Following that, I added that to the document. How are you doing? Congratulations.
Oh yeah.
He's coming of age. So I wrote, this is actually untrue. It says you go up to the Beis Hamikdash from the east, and now it's all planar. Har HaBayis is completely planar, and it's lower than the rest of the city. One, the Chazal never said that there are parts of Jerusalem, the old city, that have to be lower than Har HaBayis. Secondly, Jerusalem itself keeps building up what's now the old city. For example, the roof of Yeshivat HaKotel and Parat Yosef, and even the so-called sidewalk on, let's say, Miskav Ladach Street and the Rova, you're walking around there, you are much higher than the street was in Second Beis Hamikdash times.
Right.
You want to see actual street level in the times of Herod, for example, you have to go underneath Yeshivat HaKotel and Yeshivat Parat Yosef, where there's a gigantic museum that runs the length of them from, I think, east to west. Have you been there? It's called the Herodian Quarter.
Yeah.
So, even if you're like in the old city in the times of the Tzitz Eliezer, you can't say like I can see Har HaBayis and it looks flat and it's lower than me. One, it could very well be lower than you. Har HaBayis isn't the highest mountain, and secondly, Har HaBayis is not Kulo Mishor. He didn't see it. It looks like Mishor to him, but you're on Har HaBayis. If you're on, let's say, we've been on the western part of Har HaBayis, how many large steps up to get to the Dome of the Rock? You were just there. It's like 2 floors up, right? It's not Kulo Mishor. And when you get to Har HaBayis on the south side, you're looking up at the Dome of the Rock on your left. You have to go up many steps to get there. And when you're on the east side also, how many steps do you have to go up to get there? Exactly as described, as is delineated in Maseches Midos and in the Rambam. It's still there. There's only one place where they leveled out. They built a ramp from the north side up. But you can still see you go up. You go from where the olive trees are on the north side, which is mostly level, and you go up a flight of stairs to get to the level of the Dome of the Rock.
He's saying here that they destroyed
it,
made the whole Har HaBayis lower than Yerushalayim?
Yeah.
Generally, it doesn't happen. Usually, whenever they change the topography, they fill in land.
Yeah.
Not the other way around.
Yes, you can only fill in. So they filled in on the north side a little bit to get up to. That's why there's no steps on the north side up to the Dome of the Rock platform. It's a ramp. But other than that, unfortunately what the Tzitz Eliezer is saying here now is just not true. The history is wrong and the facts on the ground are wrong. So it's not true, and you can see it.
How could such a big Talmud Chacham be so
Because
wrong?
he didn't go there. He was relying on in red is an unreliable source, and what he saw. So I see it. It looks like a Mishor, but it's not a Mishor. Go there. I invite you to see that it's not correct. I'm going to show you what the Ramban said about this. Okay? Let's talk about when the Gaivitz wrote about this. And back then, what happened? Nowadays, we see that a lot has changed on Har HaBayis than what was from Meseches Midos time. Unfortunately, though, no, nothing changed from the destruction to Rambam's time, and what the Rambam describes is still there. Nothing has changed that much. Okay.
Well, there's olive trees there.
They planted olive trees on the north side.
Yeah.
There's new pavement in certain places, but it's all really untouched. V'azora harei yachalu lemshoch ad hamakom shirtzu mehar bayis kishenifsak b'Rambam. Also, it's possible they extended the Azara. It's true. There's halacha way to extend the Azara, but did they actually do it? Rambam says yachol, but how many times in history did they actually extend the Azara? Halachically speaking,
Never.
Once. Okay.
Didn't they?
We don't know where the Azara goes. This is true. You can only add the Azaros, but what Herod added is only to the outer areas, not the Azaros. Always beyond the Chil. Whatever Herod added is beyond the Chil. What?
That's where the women's section was?
No, the women's section was on top. The women's section is where you're davening shach. When you daven to the west, the women's section is in front of what's called the women's section is in front of you. The north side where the ramp is where the Sanhedrin used to be. I'll show you on the map later.
So that's also the actual the altar was.
The altar was on the main platform in front of the Dome of the Rock.
So that's backwards.
You might. We'll have to look on the map. Okay? So the Mishnah actually says the exact dimensions. Everything is still there. This is the surprising thing. We're not going to insult the Tzitz Eliezer, but we're going to say what he writes here is misinformation. Is it mutter to say something like that? Or you're going to say, no, the Tzitz Eliezer is correct, and therefore you're a heretic. Don't ever talk again in my shul, or you're going to keep up with this. But I just know that anybody who goes to Har Habayis disagrees fundamentally, and Rav Goren especially, he wrote Sefer Har Habayis, about this whole thing, that none of this is true. Okay? And factually, it's not. This is not something
we're not talking about his psak. We're talking about his assumptions.
Yeah, his assumptions.
Completely different.
Yes, so that's why I didn't put it in blue or green. Odzo Kasu, B'Sefer Chazon Nachum, the whole thing about us being everybody's Azav. I explained that earlier in this year.
Right.
To go and say that, maybe everybody's Azav, and we don't, and is already a stretch. And it's even more of a stretch to say you don't have to purify yourself. If you, let's say, you were 100% Azav today, the way to purify yourself is make sure you have no emissions whatsoever, which you can do. There's a way to make sure you have absolutely no emissions. What do? Wear white underwear the entire time. It's like Nikiyim. Tie it to you and make sure you have no emissions. Make everybody check you. And after 7 days have definitely passed, if you don't know how to count 7 days, make it 8 days, 9 days, 10 days. As long as you had 7 clean days, you're welcome to go to the Mayon and find the Mayon and dunk in it. You are no longer a Zav. Okay? So the idea that the Chazon Nachum had, we're all Zavim, is certainly not a mainstream halachic idea.
Right, it's definitely not.
And of course not. If it was such a big deal that we're all Zavim, maybe you would find it in the Jewish code somewhere. Or in a Gemara or something like that. Maybe the Torah would have mentioned it. Maybe the Rambam would have mentioned such a thing.
I mean, we are all Tamei mates, but not.
But that's correct. And that's why we have Tuma Dechuya B'Tzibor, Hutra B'Tzibor.
And that doesn't even matter because you can go up to the Har Habayis.
Yes, a mace can go there. And you're even allowed in the Azara if it's time to do the Avodah on everybody's tummy. So the Tumas Mace is the easiest one to get around.
Where does this idea that we're all Zavim even come from?
The Chazon Nachum.
Very specific.
We mentioned this at the beginning. Yes, it's gonorrhea, and no one has it nowadays, thank God. It's not even
that specific type of gonorrhea.
Well, whatever causes it, gonorrhea causes it, and that's the disease they know about. The Rambam describes it as a well-known disease that makes people have this problem. Food's ready. We're going to stop here very soon. So it comes out, there's no way to purify yourselves. What? Why? Go find the Mayon. They had to count 7 Nikim beforehand. Maybe they did that wrong. So count 8. What is he saying? This is obscurantist. Because most people don't know how to count 7 Nikim and go dunk in the Mayon, there's no heter.
What is he saying? We don't know how to count 7. We don't know how to see.
You might be a Zav, and you don't know how to therefore count 7 clean days. You might be.
What is he saying?
He's saying you might be a Zav, and you don't know how to count 7 clean days, and you don't know how to go dunk in the Mayon. You don't know the halachas of Zivas.
What is he saying? We're not an expert in. Maybe we're not an expert in Tzitz. I don't know. Whatever.
I don't know. That he's just. This is called obscurantism.
What are we not an expert in?
Yeah, you might. It's like I say. I want to pull a prank on Am Yisrael. I want to tell them carrots are usher on Pesach. It might be chometz. Well, how do you know it's not? You can't prove a negative. You know what? If you say you might be, like I told you before, you might be chas v'sholom a mamzer. Prove you're not.
Right.
I don't see the proof that your grandmother wasn't, whatever. So there you go. You're right. This type of
Rabbi Grossman. By these standards, you could never have children in this world.
Yeah.
Torah mishpacha would be a
yes.
You could never get.
Yes. Yeah. Gamit says that yesh manda amar de mechusar kippurim dezav kizav dami. Some say if you're a mechusar kippurim, of which I am certainly not. I've never been a zav or a mitzorah, and I'm not a ger. Okay, those are the 3 male mechusar kippurim. Okay, I've never been one of those. So let's say you're mechusar kippurim. There's an opinion that says we saw the mechusar kippurim could go into Ezras Nashim. So he can bring his korban. The Mitzorah stands outside and brings his korban. Then he can allow back in once they bring his korban. He's saying, some say you're not allowed into the Azara, the Ezras Nashim, if you're a Mechusar Kippurim. So you might be a Mechusar Kippurim. The Zaharei ain't takana bizmanidu.
I am a Mechusar Kippurim. The question is, does that mean I can't enter the Azara?
You can't enter the Azara yet until you bring your korban. A ger, all gerim, assuming you are 100% a ger. You're just a ger misafik and a political suffix, right?
No. My mother is not Jewish. I am a.
You're an actual ger. Fine,
yeah.
Fine. So you don't go into the Azara yet. Bring your korban. But that's when we tell people all the women who've had babies and all the gerim, in order to start eating korban pesach, need to at least pay the kohanim to bring their korbanos for them. The kohanim are supposed to have a fund where they drop the money in, and we'll bring their korban and it'll be taken care of. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to stop here so I can give people a chance to do what they have to do. But we'll continue this next time. And questions or comments? Anybody have anything? Oh, we have chats. I'm sorry. We are looking for the source. We don't know where it is. Okay. News related. What's happening with Paraduma of Temple Institute? I don't know. I don't know when the Peroving Nations applies. That's folk Judaism. It's not an actual halacha. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to live. So I wish you all a good week. Shabbat Shalom v'nitzachon. The rabbi has been saying, David Melech Yisrael Chai v'Kayom, which means what? Regime change. Even though King David's not here, we believe in the Davidic monarchy, okay? A Davidic restoration. That's what we're going for. Be well, everybody.